What if the world was given free energy? In the early days of fossil fuel freedom, people used up whatever fuel they had in their vehicles, boats and even lawn mowers. Perhaps that was not the smartest thing to do, but there was such a sense of freedom in the air that people responded emotionally rather than financially, now that they could. Everything that required an electrical outlet connected to the grid continued to work in those days as it had before the day before. However, people were still paying for the energy they were consuming as they had the day before, even though energy was not being generated in the same manner. It was necessary for people to get off the grid to enjoy the benefits of free energy. Government utility companies were desperately trying to generate whatever final revenue they could extract from their government-granted monopoly, so they continued to accrue charges to patrons and intended to collect even if the customers weren't planning to pay. The world renamed January 1st as Earth Day. Personally, I voted for Tesla Day, but Earth Day was good too. Parties, music festivals, and all kinds of celebrations took place over the first few weeks, but at the same time people were scrambling to take advantage of the energy boon they had been given. People out of work or financially crippled by the change had less reason to celebrate. The Earth Resonance Center in Kraninko, Transnistria provided a website with thousands of electrical conversion plans that people could implement to achieve free energy for their electrical implements. Dr. Buer and Dr. Jag's teams had designed plans outlining how they could convert their home to a self-sustaining electrical system that no longer required the grid. In fact, plans for office buildings, apartment buildings and even factories were available on the site. The plans covered almost every country in the world where such information could be determined. Plans for the battery packs that would extract energy from the earth and feed the system were made available to manufacturing companies who could begin production immediately. Once equipped, factories would no longer require bank switching startups as they had when they paid the hydro companies on a surge and consume basis. In those days, they could reduce their hydro bills by bringing their equipment online in waves and avoiding a large surge to the grid. Once equipped, households no longer had to be concerned about the time of day they ran their dishwashers or washing machines and could sleep easier. Those types of billing practices earned a lot of resentment for hydro companies by the average homeowner, Mary told me, so they were happy to see those companies go under. Revenge and spite delivering joy and happiness. Yin and yang, I suppose. Especially for those revenge and spite brought joy and happiness too. From the Earth Resonance website, both end users and entrepreneurs alike were welcome to use the plans to solve their problems or the problems of others. There was a fine line between what was gouging for service or simply a premium for jumping the queue. General Anapov was monitoring the world situation carefully with an eye to profiteering and gouging, but it would have to be on an international scale or, quite frankly, he wouldn't have been aware of it. Several countries did experience organized crime that tried to control new markets as they opened up, but local modern government forces were able to bring them into line. I feared the Pendulum Group was going to develop a network of spies and stool pigeons, but Ian assured me that would never be the case. Ian was a man of his word. There was never a threat of removing the benefit of free energy should any rules be violated, because that was not even an option. Free energy was here to stay. The General had limited options when it came to implementing deterrents to antisocial behavior. In those early days in Tasmania, we were able to function pretty much as we had before, but personally we'd been able to prepare for the day, whereas most of the world didn't have that luxury. Uncles Artis and Arthur, along with Travis and Timur, had installed rechargeable batteries in all of our buildings and residences based on designs from the Earth Resonance site that Florin sent them. Halls Falls was functioning as normal, and we kept the girls warm and well fed throughout the transition. Looking back at that time in Earth's history, it continues to amaze me to see which technologies marched forward while others stagnated or were put on hold. Still others, especially fossil fuel-based technologies, could only maintain a hobbyist-level technological advance. Some fuel was still required. Electric cars were among the champions of rapid innovation, from their basic design to how they were developed to serve humankind better. You couldn't separate the impact of battery development on all things electric from that point on, but the electric vehicle had so many additional innovations that would have boggled the mind prior to Earth Day. With our connection to the Tesla company, Mary was able to arrange the purchase of a fleet of 5 Tesla Model 3 standard range vehicles for less than $250,000 Australian dollars just a month prior to the announcement. Florin advised us we would only need the standard range vehicle because once fitted with new style batteries, the range would be infinite with either model. That information in itself saved us several $100,000. The day they arrived, Mary was like a Cheshire cat. They're all painted white with the blue Impact Labs logo on the doors and the top of the trunk. Stunning, Mary exclaimed. She was quite happy with the deal she had arranged, thanks to Cheesy, who had the Jacks use their connections with King Melon to make Mary a special customer. Cheesy himself was waiting for the new Tesla Flash that was going to be introduced before the end of the year but was only being built in Kraninko. Florin promised he would get one of the first 100. Although Tesla was synonymous with electric vehicles, they were not the only company in the world manufacturing them on Earth Day. King Melon had some competition, but conventional automakers generally provided both hybrid and electric vehicles, which meant that they had to retool their factories to produce strictly electric vehicles. Retooling represented a large capital expenditure for those companies, but was absolutely necessary for their survival. There wouldn't be a market for hybrid or fossil fuel vehicles going forward. Say goodbye to Suzuki, Alfa Romeo, Dodge, Land Rover, Chrysler, Lincoln, Toyota, and Mazda. It amazed me that Toyota and Mazda were so myopic in their vision of the future that they didn't have an electric vehicle to help push back on their financial pendulums, which eventually swung past their pivots. Nissan had produced its all-electric Leaf vehicle for almost 15 years by that point and was perfectly positioned to release its new Nissan Ariya. Chevrolet had two fully electric vehicle models when the end of fossil fuels came, the Bolt EV and Bolt EUV. They also had an SUV known as the Blazer EV, and an electric pickup truck, the Silverado EV, which came out in that first year of conversion from fossil fuel. It became the best-selling non-car vehicle in North America for the next 5 years until Tesla added some of their own larger vehicles to the market. Eventually, the Silverado EV was licensed to be built in China, which helped it to become one of the best-selling vehicles in the world. Volvo's Recharge line included two pure electric cars which saw moderate success in the northern countries for the same reasons people had always purchased Volvos in the past. Ford produced 3 all-electric vehicles which had moderate success in Canada, but their e-Transit vehicle was a much bigger success. In their early days, Ford Canada relied on their Mack Trucks division for a significant contribution to their overall business success. The e-Transit was a commercial cargo van with 3 different options for length and roof height. Ian told me you couldn't deliver anything in Canada without one of those vehicles, they were everywhere. When countries were developing in the early 20th century, it was felt that to ensure their ability to grow it was necessary for them to have specific elements in their economy. Their strategy was to have a strong domestic steel industry, grant monopolies to avoid duplication of infrastructure, such as telephones, cable, and electricity, and to control their own vehicle manufacturing. They managed it through the use of tariffs on targeted product imports, auto pacts, and anti-competition legislature. The free economy wasn't quite as free as totally free. Those countries were well positioned to retool their vehicle production to meet the domestic requirements quickly and get their economies pushing back their economic pendulums. I'm not sure that the ends justified the means, but in that case that's the way it worked out: steel, infrastructure and cars. Sweden had Polestar, a high-performance electric car company that had existing infrastructure and was able to ramp up their expansion plans to meet domestic requirements. In Croatia, they called on the Rimac luxury electric sports cars to get them back on the road and create exports. The French had Venturi, who were making luxury electric vehicles, but France was well situated to acquire German vehicles. Germany was in a better position than all other countries when it came to vehicles and was able to supply Europe, as well as vast parts of Asia, those that China didn't capture. They had Porsche, Mercedes, BMW, Audi, and Volkswagen in the German fleet. The fleet did need to retool significantly, but with German innovation and engineering it was just another boon to their economy. Japan met their own domestic needs with Nissan, Honda, and Toyota after significant retooling but failed to develop a significant export market. Toyota didn't have an electric vehicle in their arsenal prior to Earth Day. The Brits had to rely on Jaguar initially while others retooled, but they were far too slow to compete with the Germans. The British focused their attentions elsewhere in their economy and simply imported German vehicles by the boatload. Korea tried to save Kia and Hyundai, but neither were strong contenders in the electric market, so their vehicles were not sought after even in a scarce domestic market. Koreans weren't interested in their offerings. May they rest in peace. The real champion in the market of all types of electric vehicles was China, with dozens of companies including NIO, XPeng, Li Auto, Weltmeister and so many more. From the smallest scooter to the largest bus, China was ready to start pumping vehicles out and getting them on the road to make the largest population on Earth mobile. Imagine a scooter you hop on in the morning and get off 1,000 kilometers away without ever having to fill up. The oil-producing countries were hit hard by the advent of free energy, there was no denying that. 5 countries which accounted for more than 50% of the world's total crude oil production included the United States, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Canada, and Iraq. Their approach to the extraction of oil varied and would impact their futures. The world of crude oil was complex prior to Earth Day. Governments and private companies played various roles in moving crude oil from the ground to the ultimate consumer. In the United States, companies produced crude oil on both private and public lands, including offshore waters. Most of those companies were independent producers referred to as major oil companies, such as Chevron and ExxonMobil, who employed thousands of highly skilled people and operated in multiple countries. Different types of companies supplied crude oil to the global oil market, then, each with different operational agendas and production-related goals. International oil companies such as ExxonMobil, BP, and Royal Dutch Shell were investor-owned and primarily interested in increasing the value of their company's equity for their shareholders. All of their decisions were ultimately made in the interest of the company and its shareholders, not in the interest of a government or the people of the land, their employees, and certainly not the environment. In contrast, national oil companies operated as extensions of their government and included companies such as Saudi Aramco, which looked after the interests of Saudi Arabians and their various crown princes. Pemex was the guardians of Mexico, the China National Petroleum Corporation obviously looked out for all the people of China, and finally Petróleos de Venezuela S.A. oversaw the extraction of oil to benefit Venezuelans. Those companies financially supported government programs and provided strategic support to domestic consumers with lower prices than the fuels they provided to the international market. They didn't always have the incentive, means, or intention to develop their reserves at the same pace as investor-owned international oil companies. The goals of NOx often included employing citizens, furthering a government's domestic or foreign policies, generating long-term revenue to pay for government programs, or supplying inexpensive domestic energy. NOx belonged to the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, or OPEC. Crude oil production in the non-OPEC world saw a quarter of it coming from the United States, another quarter from Russia, while Canada and China each produced about 10%. Other countries impacted heavily, considering their population, were Iran, Brazil, Norway, Kazakhstan, Mexico, Qatar, and Oman. The main impact in many of those countries was the loss of corporate taxes, fuel taxes, and highly skilled labor employment. The situation of the OPEC nations was a sad story. In most cases, their total existence was based on oil, such as Saudi Arabia, which accounted for 46% of OPEC oil. Dubai, in the UAE, was once an icon of modernization and boasted the most expensive real estate in the world, now a movie set for apocalyptic epics like The Walking Dead: Rise Again and Mad Max IX. General Anapov had anticipated the Middle East will erupt in destruction of resources and the blowing of wells reminiscent of the American involvement in Kuwait and Iraq 50 years prior. Hundreds of wells needed to be capped to stop them from spewing pollutants into the environment, which added to the apocalyptic feel of the area. The general had positioned ships in the Persian Gulf and the Red Sea. Convoys of people and equipment sat poised to move in and restore the land. Unlike the wells in Kuwait and Iraq, the Saudi wells would not need to be opened again. The genie could stay in the bottle this time. The Saudi economy was the largest in the Middle East and the world's 18th by GDP. It had a very high Human Development Index, offering tuition-free university education, no personal income tax, and free universal health care. The royal family was politically divided into factions based on clan loyalties, personal ambitions, and ideological differences with the late King Fahd, his full brothers, and their descendants. Religion was a major factor with the role of the ulema in political decisions. Ulema was a body of Muslim scholars recognized as having specialist knowledge of Islamic sacred law and theology. King Salman succeeded King Abdullah upon his death less than a decade previously. On the same day, Prince Mukran became crown prince, only to be replaced 3 months later by Mohammed bin Nayef at the order of King Salman. Mohammed bin Nayef was deposed as crown prince and Salman's son Mohammed bin Salman appointed to the position in his place. The Prince Sultan died before ascending to the throne, so King Abdullah appointed Prince Nayef as the crown prince. The following year, Prince Nayef died before ascending to the throne. I'm not sure who the new king and crown princes were, but I know there was a coup with a lot of fighting in Jeddah and Riyadh, but Mecca escaped with little to no damage. Wells were set ablaze throughout the country, and it took many years to finally cap them all and truly be fossil fuel free. The new king and crown princes may have inherited the crowns, but there was not a lot of fortune left to go with them. The fate of Iraq and Kuwait seemed destined to be tied together. With Iraq supplying 15% of the crude and Kuwait 10%, they represented a significant amount of oil that the developed countries could not live without. Saddam Hussein saw the overproduction of oil beyond Kuwait's allowed limits to be a threat to Iraq's economy. In only 2 days, Hussein captured Kuwait, which brought in George Bush and the Americas, who couldn't allow the occupations. Margaret Thatcher was there to cheer George on, and the land was lit up from Kuwait City to Baghdad with missiles, troops, and blazing wellheads. It was the first war shown daily on television. It took just as long to clean up the mess created after Earth Day by terrorists in their quest to become freedom fighters. However, no scepters of leadership changed hands that time, and they remained terrorists. The United Arab Emirates only had a quarter of the crude production that Saudi Arabia enjoyed. The UAE was an elective monarchy formed from a federation of 7 emirates, each governed by an emir, and together the emirs formed the Federal Supreme Council. It was the members of that council that elected a president from among its members. The Emir of Abu Dhabi served as president, while the ruler of Dubai was vice president and prime minister. When cheesy. Errol and I were considering the reactions of democratic and communist regimes to the gift of free energy. We failed to consider theocracies in which deities of some type were recognized as supreme ruling authorities, creating divine religious governments such as the UAE, Iran, and the Vatican. Hopefully Ian, Carl and the General had better insight than we did. The United Arab Emirates had the most diversified economy in the Middle East, making the country less reliant on oil and gas, but tourism wasn't going to cut it going forward, so the government started to levy income tax, increased corporate taxes, and tripled the VAT to 15%. With a regime accused of imprisoning and torturing its citizens as well as curtailing individual rights such as freedom of assembly, association, the press, personal expression, and religion, they were able to avoid an insurgence but suffered massive destruction of all government assets at the hands of disgruntled citizens. With Libya controlling roughly 4%, their impact on the world may not have been great, but on their own economy it was staggering. In a bloodless military coup 50 years prior, Colonel Muammar Gaddafi overthrew King Idris to create a republic. Critics, like the United States, described Gaddafi as a dictator. He was one of the world's longest-serving non-royal leaders, ruling for 42 years. Sometimes the external perception of a person doesn't match the internal perception of them. Gaddafi was overthrown 10 years previously in what was known as the Libyan Civil War. That event occurred during the wider Arab Spring, which impacted many of the other Arab countries, most notably Egypt. A few years later, two rival groups in Libya had a second civil war, with Libya split between the Tobruk, Tripoli and various tribal and Islamist militias. At one point they agreed to democratic elections, but continued to procrastinate until the opportunities presenting themselves during the confusion of the early days of the loss of revenue from crude oil erupted into armed conflict that continues even now. No clear advantage is claimed by any side. Algeria was a semi-presidential system, or what was known as a dual executive system. A president existed alongside a prime minister and a cabinet, with the latter two being responsible to the legislature. The cabinet was named by the president. Although 4% of the crude oil was a significant amount of revenue, Algerians had been there before. Having lived through the Numidians, Phoenicians, Carthaginians, Romans, Vandals, Byzantines, Umayyads, Abbasids, Rustamids, Idrisids, Achlabids, Fatimids, Zirids, Hamidids, Almoravids, Almohads, Zionids, Spaniards, Ottomans and the French colonial empire, the loss of a little bit of loose change wasn't going to shut Algeria down. Angola's 4% of the crude oil market and its diamonds funded their economy. A drought less than 10 years previously caused the worst food crisis in 25 years, affecting millions of people across Angola. Prices rose, as did acute malnutrition, which doubled to 100,000 children being affected. The Angolan government was composed of three branches of government: executive, legislative and judicial. Angola was classified as not free by Freedom House in the Freedom in the World report. In parliamentary elections, the ruling Popular Movement for the Liberation of Angola won more than 70% of the vote. The result suffered from serious flaws, including outdated and inaccurate voter rolls. Voter turnout dropped from 80% to 60%. The U.S. Department of State, on the topic of Angola, said, "The most important human rights abuses were official corruption and impunity. Limits on the freedoms of assembly, association, speech, and press, and cruel and excessive punishment, including reported cases of torture and beatings as well as unlawful killings by police and other security personnel." Pendulums flipped immediately that day, creating a feeling of freedom for the entire country. They continue to rebuild. Ian had several Nigerian doctor friends and he gave me additional insight into the country's post-Earth Day events. Nigeria was not your run-of-the-mill sub-Saharan country. They had 6% of OPEC's oil, which created an economy that was the largest in Africa and the 25th largest in the world as measured by GDP, if you can imagine. It was a federal republic with 36 states and a federal capital territory, in Abuja, but the largest city was Lagos. Lagos was one of the largest metropolitan areas in the world and the second largest in Africa, but definitely the most infamous. It defined Nigeria. Nigeria experienced a civil war followed by a succession of military dictatorships interlaced with democratically elected civilian governments until finally achieving a stable democracy 20 years prior to Earth Day. With more than 250 ethnic groups speaking 500 distinct languages, there were a wide variety of culture pendulums swinging. Sometimes with all the money in the world, happiness can still be elusive. Nigeria ranked as one of the most corrupt nations in the world and very low on the Human Development Index, so it was no great surprise that Nigeria became Lagos. What does that mean? Lagos had its challenges even with the OPEC money rolling in. Differences between poverty and wealth, access to jobs, housing, and education were evident. Pollution, chemicals, noise, dirt, or other substances harmful or even poisonous to humans could be found everywhere. Sanitation measures designed to protect public health, including the provision of clean water and the disposal of sewage and waste, were non-existent. The Makoko slum was a slum neighborhood located in eastern Lagos running between the 3rd Mainland Bridge and the coast of mainland Lagos. A third of the community was built on stilts because it ran along the edge of the lagoon and the land. Like many slums around the world, at some point it became valuable land, and in this case dozens of homes were destroyed by the Nigerian government with 72 hours notice of eviction. The redevelop of prime waterfront saw 3,000 people rendered homeless. Lack of sanitation meant communal toilets shared by 15 households with sewage and kitchen residues ending up in the water below their homes. Being vulnerable to sea level change and flooding meant that water came back up in their bedrooms before morning. There was a lack of access to clean water, with few water pipes in the slum, and those that did exist only supplied water 2 hours a day before being shut down by the city authorities. Queue up for water. Air pollution in Lagos had dangerous levels of nitrous oxides, high levels of volatile organic compounds and small dust particles called particulate matter. There was no city-based waste collection system with estimated volumes of 13 million kilograms of waste per day. That creates a mountain of uncollected waste. Electricity supply was the one thing that did improve after Earth Day, but that had little pushback value against so many pendulums going the other way. Nigeria became Lagos throughout without the OPEC money. The countries and companies that extracted oil from the earth merely set the oil on its journey to the ultimate consumer, who lay in wait many steps down the path. The crude oil needed to be shipped from where it was extracted to where the refineries were located to process it. That could happen in several different ways: pipeline, rail, trucks, ships, or barges, each creating its own potential environmental disaster, which was now avoided. Earth Day. The crude oil had to be stored for a while in a queue once it reached the refineries. Massive amounts accumulated, biding its time until it was sent to the furnace and made its ultimate climb at the distillation tower. There it was separated by its boiling point. Crude oil was converted by heating, pressure, or some type of catalyst into finished products such as gasoline, diesel, and specialty products in the asphalt and solvents lines. Final products were then shipped to customers through different pipelines, on different rail systems, down different roads, on different trucks, or on different bodies of water in different ships and different barges. Each created the opportunity for another environmental disaster that was avoided. Earth Day. Your local gas station would not have gotten a top-up that month, and your lucky collector stamps were no longer redeemable for merchandise after Earth Day. An unfortunate outcome. Oil refineries had many skilled employees whose talents were not readily transferable to other industries, and with only a few being needed to process the alternative substances still required by society, those people required retraining. There was still a demand for jet fuel for a period of time, and most crude that was still being extracted went for that purpose. Jet fuel, or aviation turbine fuel, was a type of aviation fuel designed for use in aircraft powered by gas turbine engines. The most commonly used fuels for commercial aviation were Jet A and Jet A1, produced to a standardized international specification. Almost all jet fuels were derived from crude oil in refineries and manufactured to tightly controlled specifications. They accounted for about 6% of total global refinery fuel production prior to Earth Day, but almost 90% afterward. Crude oil wasn't the only fossil fuel that saw its production severely curtailed on Earth Day. Natural gas was primarily methane, with low concentrations of other hydrocarbons, water, carbon dioxide, nitrogen, oxygen, and some sulfur compounds. It was extracted from subsurface rock formations by drilling, but with advances in hydraulic fracturing technologies could access large volumes of natural gas from shale. Thank you so much, Earth Day. Transmission lines for natural gas were comparable to a highway system for cars. They moved large amounts of natural gas thousands of kilometers from producing regions to consumer distribution companies. The pressure of gas in each section of the line ranged from 200 to 1,500 psi, although the pipes were designed and constructed to handle much more. Prior to Earth Day, natural gas provided warmth for heating and flames for cooking, as well as fueling power stations that provided electricity to homes and businesses. For people who heated their house or cooked their food with natural gas, it was necessary to purchase new appliances to get off the grid. Florin told me that back in the day, heating your house with natural gas was far cheaper than electricity. That pendulum certainly had shifted on that option. Until they purchased the comparable electric appliance, they were on the natural gas meter and paying a utility company. Conversion was not an option for those types of appliances. The United States produced about a third of the world's gas, while Russia contributed a quarter, and between Canada, Norway, China, and Australia they contributed another quarter. The rest fell within countries that were already crippled by the loss of oil, such as Saudi Arabia, Algeria, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. Natural gas supplies were basically considered domestic after that, so there was little to no transport of gas through long-distance pipelines or other methods. Dick's father saw a total collapse of his pipeline business in the first decade after Earth Day, but other needs for pipelines arose and the business eventually recovered, albeit a little late for Dick Ward Jr. Coal was an interesting fossil fuel back in the day, used as a fuel to generate electric power and other fuel. In coal-fired power plants, bituminous coal, subbituminous coal, or lignite was burned. The heat produced by the combustion of the coal converted water into high-pressure steam, driving turbines to produce electricity. A quarter of all electricity in the United States was generated by coal-fired power plants. Certain types of bituminous coal were used in making steel once the moisture was removed and it was converted to coke. Steel making required high carbon content and low moisture, ash, sulfur, and phosphorus content. That was known as metallurgical coal. It had, and still does have, to a minor effect, a myriad of other uses, including cement production, carbon fibers and foams, medicines, tars, and synthetic petroleum-based fuels. A monument to coal will burn underneath Centralia, Pennsylvania for the next 500 years. Not quite an eternal flame. The world found 50% of its coal in China, with smaller amounts deposited between India, Indonesia, the United States, Australia, and Russia. Minor players in the world of coal included South Africa, Kazakhstan, Germany, and Poland. Coal mining only had tragic stories in its history. Production of uranium came from mines in Kazakhstan, Canada, and Australia, where over 60% was produced by in situ leaching, a mining process to recover minerals through boreholes drilled into a deposit in situ. It artificially dissolved minerals occurring naturally in a solid state. The leaching solution was pumped into the deposit where it made contact with the ore, then dissolved ore content was pumped to the surface and processed. Those solutions for uranium ore were sulfuric acid or sodium bicarbonate, ammonium carbonate, or dissolved carbon dioxide. The extracted uranium solution was filtered through resin beads in an ion exchange process. The resin beads attracted uranium from the solution. Uranium-loaded resins were then transported to a processing plant, where U-308 was used to separate the yellow cake uranium. Storage of used fuel was normally underwater for at least 5 years and then often in dry storage. Deep geological disposal was widely agreed to be the best solution for final disposal of the most radioactive waste produced. Although nuclear power was no longer required as an energy source, it did, however, still make a fine weapon in the hands of the wrong people. There was no need to dispose of that waste. Before Earth Day, electricity was generated by several different methods before being pumped into the grid so that people could take it out again to make their electrical things function. Energy for electricity generation consumed fossil fuels, like coal, natural gas, and petroleum, as well as nuclear energy and renewable energy sources. That was achieved with steam, gas, or hydro turbines. They were supplemented to a lesser extent by wind turbines and solar photovoltaics. China accounted for 40% of the world's electricity, while the United States contributed a quarter. India, Russia, Japan, Canada, Brazil, South Korea, Germany, and France were also significant players, primarily supporting their domestic requirements. Natural gas was the largest source used in steam turbines and gas turbines to generate electricity, while coal took the silver metal, using steam turbines almost exclusively. Hydropower plants grabbed the bronze, using flowing water to spin turbines connected to generators. Wind turbines converted wind energy into electricity. Solar energy provided it from photovoltaic cells, and solar thermal power pushed through steam turbines, as did geothermal power plants. The day before Earth Day, dams irrigated 1/7 of the world's food crops, with more than 57,000 large dams that changed the face of the planet. Everyone had their favorite dams to hate. Rick volunteered. The Hoover Dam gave us Las Vegas and was the world's highest dam at the time it was constructed. The dam supported agricultural and industrial development. The dam destroyed the Colorado River's fisheries. Climate change over the decades has greatly affected the dam's capacity to supply water. Its ability to generate power was of no consequence post-Earth Day. Ian added, the Kariba Dam on the Zambezi River in Africa was built to power Zambia's copper belt, father told me. It was the first large dam funded by the World Bank. He said it was seen as a symbol of a brave new world which could control nature and bring quick economic development. Ultimately, he said, it displaced more than 50,000 people. They suffered years of famine and are still living in an impoverished society today. Sandy contributed, the Bakra Dam became the symbol of India's Green Revolution and was hailed by Prime Minister Nehru as a temple of modern India. However, the reality was badly managed irrigation schemes, resulting in waterlogged, saline soils with diminishing harvests. Devastating famines resulted which, in India, encompassed huge masses of people. The Sardar Sarovar Dam on India's Narmada River displaced more than 250,000 indigenous people and that forced the World Bank to reconsider their position on building third world dams. They withdrew from that particular project due to violations of its social and environmental policies. I added, my friend Juan told me about a dam in Central America. The Chicxoy Dam became known as the grave on the Rio Negro. Communities suffered repression and human rights abuses with more than 400 indigenous men, women and children massacred to make way for the World Bank's Chicxoy Dam in Guatemala. The government later signed a $154 million reparations agreement with the affected communities. Reparations could be a path to create new equalities in the world based on relieving today's royals of the guilt of their ancestors. I was thinking of our friend Roly-Poly Prince Albert, who is now Roly-Poly King Albert. Ian said. I might need Cheesy's help on that one. Carl should get someone working on the World Bank to help us fund pendulum projects like providing clean drinking water to the world and have them stop funding dam disasters. They may have massacred more indigenous people than all the popes combined. I added. Ian offered, the world's biggest dam disaster was surely the failure of China's Banqiao Dam, which killed an estimated 171,000 people. Scientists claim more than 100 decameters buildings over the years have led to multiple earthquakes. There is strong evidence to suggest China's Sichuan earthquake, which killed 80,000 people, may have been triggered by the Zipingpu Dam. Three Gorges Dam in China was Mao Zedong's dream come true, perhaps because it displaced more than 1.2 million people and ravaged the ecosystem of the Yangtze River. A cultural disaster that knowingly flooded thousands upon thousands of ancient temples and sites. When China integrates itself into the world, the temples of the Three Gorges must surely be explored. The Chinese government decided to take their dam building show on the road and funded the Meroe Dam in Sudan as its first big overseas hydropower project. The dam displaced more than 50,000 people, and serious human rights violations were perhaps more costly than the interest rate the Chinese banks charged. Chinese banks and companies were involved in some 330 dams in 74 countries, leading an unprecedented global dam building boom prior to Earth Day. Please Earth Day, stop them. The United States removed more than 1,150 dams in an effort to restore river ecosystems and fish habitats. Food for thought. No new dams were created for power purposes, but water was still a viable reason. Water conservation only. After Earth Day, the primary value of dams around the world was for their fresh water. Rivers, like the Colorado in the United States, had all of its water accounted for by various states before it ever reached its logical conclusion in the Gulf of Mexico or even the Salton Sea at times. With less water in the Colorado, water was now the biggest problem in the United States and many parts of the world. Several countries had opportunistic political uprisings shortly after Earth Day. The most significant was in the United States, where Arnold Stump tried to incite a coup, but it was widely anticipated and barely made it through its first night. I think Mr. Stump is now 100 feet below ground and perhaps wearing a fashionable Hannibal Lecter mask in his own perpetual Halloween. It's probably a good look for him. In the United States, Northern pendulums pushed against Southern pendulums and Eastern pushed against Western, but ultimately they found equilibrium and joined the world in moving forward. In Bangladesh, rebel army officers attempted their second coup in less than a dozen years, but they were successful this time. Ian had his eyes on Bangladesh as a target to raise the worldwide quality of human dignity. He hoped that he could work with the new government. Burkina Faso, Ethiopia, Gabon, and Jordan all saw some form of change in their governments. Gabon was significant because it was a neighbor of Angola. Prior to Earth Day, coal companies faced soaring premiums, reduced coverage and longer searches to find companies willing to insure them due to the declining popularity of financing fossil fuels. Any type of insurance was about risk. Insurance companies needed their risk mitigated as well as their clients who were trying to protect themselves. Reinsurance accepts part of the risk covered by insurance companies, as well as providing comprehensive advice on insurance business. You may not think about those companies when you think about insurance, but your insurance companies sure do. Munich Re provided reinsurance coverage for life, health, casualty, transport, aviation, space, fire, and engineering businesses. Gross premiums amounted to about €31.3 billion prior to Earth Day. Munich Re's primary insurance operations were mainly concentrated in the Ergo Insurance Group, with gross premiums written of about €17.8 billion. It was not possible to absorb a €48 billion loss and show up for work the next day. AXA, Allianz, Munich Re, and Zurich provided more than a fifth of all oil and gas insurance. AIG, Travelers, Zurich, Allianz, Chubb and Liberty Mutual with more than half the underwriting of the industry. AXA was one of the world's leading insurance groups with major businesses in property and casualty insurance, life insurance, savings, and asset management. It was a French multinational insurance company but could not withstand the pressure on its stock. Allianz was a leading global financial services company, providing products and services from insurance to asset management. It offered insurance products ranging from property and casualty policies to health and life insurance for corporate and individual customers. The company was headquartered in Germany and was supported by the stronger German economy and managed to bridge the early disasters. Berkshire Hathaway Inc. was a major conglomerate and a premier insurance company owning businesses in the sectors of rail transportation, utilities and energy, manufacturing, services, and retailing, which provided both primary insurance and reinsurance of property and casualty risks through companies such as Geico, Berkshire Hathaway Reinsurance Group, Berkshire Hathaway Primary Group, General Re, National Indemnity Company and others. Based in Omaha, Nebraska, United States, the company wholly owned Duracell, Dairy Queen, BNSF Railway, Lubrizol, Fruit of the Loom, Helzberg Diamonds, Long & Foster, Flight Safety International, Shaw Industries, Pampered Chef, Forest River, and NetJets, and significant minority holdings in public companies Kraft Heinz Company, American Express, Bank of America, the Coca-Cola Company, and Apple. Diversification was the secret to their survival and indeed their ability to rebound with some of the new technology that fueled the world's development from Earth Day on. The Chinese insurance market was a mystery to me at the time. How did communist countries function through what appeared to be capitalist ventures on the outside, such as the Shanghai Stock Exchange? I was under the impression that the government owned everything, but obviously that wasn't true because loyal citizens had money that they could use to purchase shares in companies to either earn dividends or capital gains. In fact, there were other stock exchanges in China, not counting the Stock Exchange of Hong Kong, which had been returned to China. The Chinese people must have access to that market as well, with 2,538 listed companies and a combined market capitalization of about $7 trillion United States dollars. The Shanghai Stock Exchange was the world's third largest stock market by market capitalization at $7.6 trillion United States dollars prior to Earth Day. It's still not entirely open to foreign investors and is often affected by the decisions of the central government, due to capital account controls exercised by the Chinese mainland authorities. Shanghai is a non-profit organization directly administered by the China Securities Regulatory Commission. The Shenzhen Stock Exchange, based in the city of Shenzhen, had a market capitalization of its listed companies of approximately $2.5 trillion United States dollars. China's leader, Xi Jinping, established the Beijing Stock Exchange to help serve small to medium-sized enterprises in China, only a year before Earth Day. The NEEQ exchange was converted into the Beijing Stock Exchange as the primary platform for small business, with the NEEQ exchange contributing almost 6,000 companies it had listed. The National Equities Exchange and Quotations was an over-the-counter system for trading the shares of public companies not on other exchanges. Individual investors were required to have securities assets of at least RMB 500,000 and at least 2 years of experience in securities investing to qualify for trading on the bourse. The term bourse was a French word for the stock exchange, or as a place to buy and sell securities, commodities, options, and other investments commonly used in China. Institutional investors were not subject to capital requirements. Trading would be temporarily suspended for 10 minutes if the stock's price rose above 30% or dropped over 60%, except on its opening day. American investors would probably stick up their noses at such intervention, but when the country bails out companies, what's the point of investing in things not protected by the government? Ping An Insurance was involved primarily in insurance, financial services, and banking. It was one of the top 50 companies listed on the Shanghai Stock Exchange and China's first joint stock insurance company. Subsidiaries included, at the time, Ping An Life, Ping An Property and Casualty, Ping An Annuity, and Ping An Health, not to mention dozens of others. It was reformed after Earth Day, but the details are unclear as to how the new structure of Ping World reflected the old. Many of the Chinese companies remained in operation, but were restructured or modified through mergers and transitions to other forms. China Life Insurance was one of the mainland's largest state-owned insurance and financial services companies, and a key player in the Chinese capital market as an institutional investor. Again, due to diversification, it managed to re-emerge after Earth Day. The company's webs today have spread to numerous subsidiaries across life insurance, pension plans, asset management, property and casualty, as well as investment holdings. With the Chinese central government its controlling shareholder, the People's Insurance County operated a number of subsidiaries that provided property, life, pension, and health insurance products, as well as reinsurance. To bring down that company, you would have to bring down the Chinese government. I wondered, do Chinese investors pay tax on the value of their stock? How does that whole capitalist deal work in China? The People's Republic of China had a system officially described as a socialist market economy. China had the world's second largest economy when measured by GDP, with forecasts putting it on the gold medal platform in less than 10 years, but that was before Earth Day. They were the world's largest manufacturing economy, exporter of goods, fastest growing consumer market and second largest importer of goods at the time. Individual income tax in China for PRC residents was based on their worldwide income. Income tax on wages and salaries was calculated at progressive rates ranging from 3% to 46% based on how much income they earned. The employer paid the tax authorities on a monthly basis up to a maximum of 46% if the citizen earned 1 million RMB or more. That's no different from the democratic world other than perhaps the rates. Even the employer is required to deduct a withholding tax, and RMB 500,000 sounds like a considerable income. Capital gains, interest, dividends, and royalties were all taxed at a flat rate of 20%. If I made a capital gain here, Carl tells me I would have to add half of the profit to my regular income, which would push it to a higher rate, so how much I actually pay in percentage would differ based on where I lived around the world. 20% for interest income and royalty income was more than competitive, according to Carl, who preferred a simplified flat-rate tax for everything. The Chinese people also paid a value-added tax and consumption tax like the rest of the world. Politicians the world over love VAT, I wonder why. Products whose overconsumption were considered harmful to health, social order, or the environment, such as tobacco, alcohol, firecrackers, and fireworks were taxed. In addition, luxury goods, precious jewelry and cosmetics, high-energy consumption products, non-renewable and non-replaceable petroleum products, and financially significant products, such as yachts. I wonder if rhino horn was taxed. A plethora of other taxes were levied just as the rest of the world does on its people so that the government can function. An opportunity for government to grab a fee is seldom missed in any country. Stamp tax was levied on contracts for purchases and sales, processing, construction and engineering projects, asset leasing, goods transportation, storage and warehousing, loans, asset insurance, technology contracts, property rights transfers, accounting ledgers and royalty licensing. And finally surcharges on foreign dog enterprises and the foreign dogs themselves, who were subject to VAT and CT, as well as construction and maintenance taxes, an education surcharge, and a local education surcharge. Many companies around the world found it impossible to cope with those changes in the shadow of the worldwide COVID pandemic, with more than 12% of all incorporated, limited liability corporations around the world failing. The first few years after Earth Day saw more new companies incorporated than were lost, and the world carried on. Some people didn't carry on. Specifically, the Lloyds names that fell that day were subject to unlimited liability that could never satiate the debt that was generated by Earth Day calamities. Lorenzo found us several lists of people who were supposed to be names, but they could never be confirmed. Arnold Stump was rumored to be on that list, as were many of his friends who seemed to follow his advice. Perhaps that's why he felt the time for a coup had finally arrived. Other famous people rumored to be on the list included Kim Kardashian, Kanye West, James Ratcliffe, Martha Stewart, Marco Royce, Ted Turner, Thomas Muller, George Bush Jr., Sergio Ramos, Lionel Messi, Stephen Person, Serena Williams, Leonid Fedon, Cristiano Ronaldo, Oprah Winfrey, Peter Avon, LeBron James, Justin Bieber, Mark Zuckerberg, Leighton Baines, Santi Cazorla, Giovanni Ferrero, Emmanuel Besnier, Dietrich Mateschitz, Charlene de Carvalho Heineken, Mukesh Ambani, Leonid Mikkelsen, Gennady Timchenko, Nikolai Buinov and Yelena Bachurina. I recognized one name from the list dating back to my days in Schaffhausen. Viscount August Mendeley was a student at our school and shared a room with Wan briefly while he was there. That was how I met him. In an email with Wan, he recounted a story where the young Viscount would like to dress in all his finery and parade around the school like he was the Grand Emperor. He even had a custom-made sword. Ian, Dick, Cheesy and I recognized two names from the list that we knew from our Ridgeway days. Samuel Rothschild was a roommate of Dick's for a while. We called him Porky for no other reason than he was fat and had a pushed-up nose. Children can be mean and usually honest. Dick had helped Samuel raid Roly-Poly Prince Albert's extensive chocolate stash, getting away with over 3 kilos of the finest chocolate money could buy. Porky and Dick shared it with us. I also helped Porky steal a cheesecake from Chef Philippe, and he ate the whole thing himself. It was one of those 2-foot cheesecakes meant to serve 30 people. Cheesy said, "I guess I'll never be collecting on that debt." The other schoolmate was the future Baron McDougal, but we knew him as Donny McDougal. The title ranks higher than a lord or knight, but lower than a viscount or count. Donny was always on our excursions from school and often helped Cheesy spring some of the other royal brats from the custody of their keepers. I had a plan to get little Duke Fitzroy away from his 2 security guards, and Donny arranged for a huge bucket of oil to spill in the hallway between the little Duke and his security guards. Donny ran out the door on our signal, and it took his keepers at least 15 minutes to make it to the door. By that time the Duke and I had made it to the forest and were halfway down the hill. Cheesy told us, Ian thought General Anapov did an excellent job in containing most of the explosive events around the world without interfering in internal politics or religions. The general monitored terrorism like the destruction of wells, conflict in countries where pendulums were swinging wildly, and opportunistic terrorism by groups seeking revenge. Although there were minor occurrences of all those events, there were none that set additional pendulums swinging. Airports gradually reopened to full capacity as refineries shifted production to the only major outlet for fossil fuels, aviation fuel. However, by that time we had decided to postpone our visit to Windhaven to the next year. Jet fuel or aviation turbine fuel was designed for use in aircraft that were powered by gas turbine engines. The only other jet fuel commonly used in civilian turbine engine-powered aviation is Jet B, for its enhanced cold weather performance. Jet fuel was defined as a performance specification rather than a chemical compound. Worldwide demand for jet fuel steadily increased over the 50 years prior to Earth Day. In fact, consumption more than tripled over the previous 30 years and continued growing as production was shifted to those products. Commercial boats used either marine gas oil or marine diesel oil at the time of Earth Day, but they were quickly refitted with electric motors. Smaller boats such as outboards already had lithium-based batteries for their electric motors, which simply needed to be rechargeable. The reduction in weight had to be compensated for with ballast in the larger vessels. As Carl had predicted, many people went to gold as their safe investment. The price of gold rose to over $10,000 US an ounce. Carl told me he sold our existing reserves for about $8,500 on average. When I asked him if he regretted not getting $10,000, he said, "It's not the first 25%, nor the last 25% that I'm after. It's the 50% in the middle." Gold continued to drop for the next 6 months until it settled around $2,900 US and Carl bought back in. It stabilized around that mark. Lorenzo and Cheesy had a friend in their New York posse they called Midas. I'm sure that wasn't his real name, but who was I to question? Midas was an expert in cryptocurrencies. Buying, selling and manipulating, Lorenzo informed me. In fact, he was so good that he was Carl's man in cryptocurrencies after an introduction from Lorenzo. Cryptocurrency was in vogue in some areas. It was a digital currency designed to work as a medium of exchange through a computer network not reliant on any central authority, such as a government or bank, to uphold or maintain it. A decentralized system for verifying that the parties to a transaction had the money they claimed to have, eliminating the need for traditional intermediaries when funds were being transferred between two entities. No banks or governments manipulating. Individual coin ownership records were stored in a digital ledger, which was a computerized database using strong cryptography to secure transaction records, to control the creation of additional coins, and to verify the transfer of coin ownership. Cheesy told me, somebody had to write those computerized databases using strong cryptography. And I knew exactly whom he meant. Despite their name, cryptocurrencies were not considered to be true currencies in the traditional sense, but generally viewed as a distinct asset class in practice. Some crypto schemes used validators to maintain their currency. In a proof-of-stake model, owners put up the tokens as collateral. In return, they get authority over the token in proportion to the amount they stake. Generally, these token stakers get additional ownership in the token over time via network fees, newly minted tokens, or other such reward mechanisms. When implemented with decentralized control, each cryptocurrency works through distributed ledger technology, typically a blockchain, that serves as a public financial transaction database. I had to ask Cheesy the question, what's a blockchain? I'm sure I asked on Errol's behalf as well. A blockchain is a shared, immutable ledger that facilitates the process of recording transactions and tracking assets in any business network. An asset can be a tangible item like a house, car, cash, land, or intangible like intellectual property, patents, copyrights, branding. Virtually anything that has value can be tracked and traded on a blockchain network, thereby reducing risk and cutting costs for all involved. Blockchain is ideal for delivering that information because it provides immediate, shared and completely transparent information stored on an immutable ledger that can be accessed only by permissioned network members. A blockchain network can track orders, payments, accounts, production and basically anything. The members share a single view of the truth, with all details of a transaction from end to end. To have a blockchain, you must have distributed ledger technology. That requires all network participants have access to the distributed ledger and its immutable record of transactions. With that shared ledger, transactions are recorded only once, eliminating the duplication of effort that's typical in traditional business networks. Errol asked, what makes a record immutable other than one of Sandy's Hindu gods? Quote. Cheesy replied, no participant can change or tamper with a transaction after it's been recorded to the shared ledger. If a transaction record includes an error, a new transaction must be added to reverse the error, and both transactions are then visible. Try not to be sloppy, please. To speed up transactions, a set of rules known as a smart contract is stored on the blockchain and executed automatically. A smart contract can define conditions for corporate bond transfers, include terms for travel insurance to be paid, and basically anything else except those things that haven't been thought of yet. As each transaction occurs, it's recorded as a block of data which shows the movement of an asset of value. Each block is connected to the ones before and after it to form a chain of data as an asset moves from place to place or ownership changes hands. The blocks confirm the exact time and sequence of transactions, and the blocks link securely together to prevent any block from being altered or a block being inserted between two existing blocks. Transactions are blocked together in an irreversible chain, a blockchain. Like a giant conga line, I observed. He continued, each additional block strengthens the verification of the previous block and hence the entire blockchain. That renders the blockchain tamper evident, delivering the key strength of immutability. That removes any possibility of tampering. Bitcoin was released as open-source software less than 15 years prior to Earth Day. By Earth Day, there were more than 9,000 other cryptocurrencies in the marketplace, with 70 having a market capitalization exceeding $1 billion US fools and their money. The Bank for International Settlements criticizes cryptocurrencies due to stability in their price. The high energy consumption, high and variable transactions costs, the poor security and fraud at cryptocurrency exchanges which are vulnerable to debasement from forking, and the influence of miners. We were told that a fork is simply a change in the blockchain's protocol that the software uses to decide whether a transaction is valid or not. Almost any divergence in the blockchain can be considered a fork, which occurs when the user base or developers decide that something fundamental needs to change. A major hack with Ethereum, a fundamental disagreement within the community, as with Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash, can be examples of good reasons to have a fork. I like the concept of soft forks, which were any changes that were backward compatible. They risk being the smallest chain and becoming orphaned from the network, becoming a hard fork. Rough neighborhood if you're forked. Non-fungible tokens are digital assets that represent art, collectibles, gaming, and the like. Their data was stored on the blockchain. NFTs were bought and traded using cryptocurrency. The Ethereum blockchain was the first place where NFTs were implemented, but now many other blockchains have created their own versions of NFTs. The popularity of NFTs was on the rise at the time of Earth Day. Mining for proof-of-work cryptocurrencies required enormous amounts of electricity and consequently came with a large carbon footprint. Proof-of-work blockchains such as Bitcoin, Ethereum, Litecoin, and Monero were estimated to have added between 3 million and 15 million tons of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere a year. He said. We asked Cheesy what power cryptocurrencies were and he told us, proof-of-work was a system that required great effort in order to deter frivolous or malicious uses of computing power. Frivolous efforts like sending spam emails or launching denial-of-service attacks. That concept was adapted to securing digital money by a fellow known as Hal Finney through the idea of reusable proof-of-work using the SHA-256 hashing algorithm, which was a patented cryptographic hash function that outputted a value 256 bits long. In encryption, data is transformed into a secure format that is unreadable unless the recipient has a key. In its encrypted form, the data may be of unlimited size, often just as long as when unencrypted. Hashes are similarly used to verify digital signatures. SHA-256 was used in some of the most popular authentication and encryption protocols, including SSL, TLS, IPsec, SSH, and PGP. In Unix and Linux, SHA-256 was used for secure password hashing. Bitcoin uses SHA-256 to verify transactions. Since a given set of data can only generate one hash, miners need to make sure they generate a hash below the target. They alter the input by adding an integer, called a nonce or a number used once. Once a valid hash is found, it's broadcasted to the network and the block is added to the blockchain. Other alternatives to proof-of-work include proof-of-stake or proof-of-burn, because without a proof mechanism, the network and the data stored within it would be vulnerable to attack or theft. All methods have their critics. Midas have predicted that when energy became free, the value of a Bitcoin would sink like Lorenzo's heart when his prom date was a no-show, because mining costs would be cleaved by more than half. And he was right. Unlike the stock market, though, there were no puts or calls to take advantage of cryptocurrency falls. Bitcoin was estimated to have an annual energy consumption of 45.8 terawatt-hours, generating 22.0 to 22.9 million tons of CO2, rivaling nations like Jordan and Sri Lanka. The industry produced 65.4 million tons of CO2, as much as Greece, and consumed between 91 and 177 terawatt-hours annually. They could all mine for free after Earth Day, a carbon disaster. Bitcoin was the least energy-efficient cryptocurrency, using 707.6 kilowatt-hours of electricity per transaction. The world's second-largest cryptocurrency, Ethereum, used 62.56 kilowatt-hours of electricity per transaction. XRP was the world's most energy-efficient cryptocurrency, using just 0.0079 kilowatt-hours of electricity per transaction. Although the biggest power blockchains consumed energy on the scale of medium-sized countries, the annual power demand from proof-of-stake POS blockchains was on a scale equivalent to a housing estate. 6 environmentally friendly cryptocurrencies included Chia, IOTA, Cardano, Nano, Solarcoin and Bitgreen, had any of them survived. Cardano had the lowest electricity use per node, Polkadot had the lowest electricity use overall, and Solana the lowest electricity use per transaction. Cryptocurrency transactions were irreversible after a number of blocks confirm a transaction. Additionally, cryptocurrency private keys could be permanently lost from local storage due to malware, data loss or the destruction of the physical media. This precluded the cryptocurrency from being spent, resulting in its removal from the markets. There was a significant increase in crypto-related suicides after the cryptocurrency market crash. As in prior instances, the situation was critical in Korea where crypto traders were on suicide watch after the Earth Day plummet. Currencies of countries tended to react to Earth Day as the country reacted to Earth Day. American, British, French, and Italian currencies fell modestly while the German mark rose to all-time highs. For the full story please read the new unpublished Pendulums and subscribe to Huda Thunkit PhD.